Welcome to the Veritas Forum, engaging university students and faculty in discussions about life's hardest questions and the relevance of Jesus Christ to all of life.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. It's a great turnout. I'm 62 years old. Over the last decade, I've had more and more evidence of my mortality. I've lost hearing in the high frequencies. I forget names of people. I forget words that I want to use in my writing. I used to be a runner, and I had to stop running a couple of years ago because my knees were getting bad. No matter how much I concentrate on improving my hearing or my memory or my knees, my mental thoughts cannot reverse the changes in my body. And I'm reminded that all of us and I are material beings. Our consciousness and our self-awareness create an illusion that we are made out of some special substance, that we have some kind of special ego power, some I-ness, some unique existence. But in fact, we are nothing but bones, tissues, gelatinous membranes, neurons, electrical impulses, and chemicals. We are material. We are stuff. In principle, someone could write down a complete tally of the number of oxygen atoms in our body, the number of carbon atoms, the number of hydrogen atoms, and so forth. We are a bunch of atoms, like trees and like donuts. And when we die, those atoms will be scattered back into soil, air, and water. True, for a brief period of time, my atoms have a special arrangement, particularly in my brain, that leads to consciousness, thought, and self-awareness. But that special arrangement will soon be scattered and rearranged, and this physical thing that is me will be gone. In my case, I hope in another 30 years, if I'm lucky. Coming to terms with our materiality is the most difficult challenge that we have in our existence. All that said, we can still find meaning during our brief flicker of existence. I believe that a cosmic meaning does not exist. Instead, each of us must find his or her personal meaning for the universe and personal meaning for our individual lives. We are exquisitely built machines that can define their own activities and purposes. We have the power to search for meaning, to search for our individual principles and purposes, and to live by those principles. For me, I have never found a principle more compelling than the golden rule, a recipe for living that is found in almost all religions on earth. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I've tried to live by that principle with my family, with my friends, and even with people that I don't particularly like. Although I believe that we are material beings, purely material, and I believe that our consciousness vanishes entirely when I die, and I see no evidence for a super being who created and guides the universe, I still consider myself to be a spiritual person. Different people have different meanings for the concept of spirituality. For me, spirituality is the belief in something larger than myself. Spirituality is the belief in principles and values for living. Spirituality is the recognition of beauty and meaning in myself and in other people and in the world. Spirituality is connection to other people. Spirituality is also an attempt to answer the great questions of existence, such as how did the universe come into being and what is its future? What is the purpose of my individual life? How can I live a life with meaning? I am an atheist, but a spiritual atheist. I've been lucky in my life. In addition to teaching at MIT, I've had two very different careers as a physicist and as a novelist. Both of these professions have brought me some satisfaction. As a scientist, I've added a little bit to human knowledge. As a writer, I've changed people's thinking and appreciation of the world a little bit. About 7 years ago, I had an experience that changed me. I went to Cambodia, 12 time zones away, and traveled to a small and remote village. The women in the village approached me carrying their infants and asked me to build them a school. I was deeply impressed that these villagers, living in one-room huts without electricity, without plumbing, living on subsistence farming, owning nothing but the clothes on their backs, believed in the power of education. Only 30 years earlier, their village, and in fact all of Cambodia, had been devastated by a horrible genocide in which a quarter of the population was murdered. Even with this tragic history, these women had hope. They believed in the future. Through my work with them and with other people in Cambodia, I've come to have renewed respect for the strength and the nobility of the human spirit. I built a school in that village, and I've also built a couple of dormitories for women in the capital city of Cambodia. But I have received far more than I've given. I've been lifted by this experience. I have been inspired by these people. And my own view of the world has been changed. I've come to understand that many things I own, I don't need. In fact, much of what I thought was once necessary, such as automobiles, cell phones, automatic washing machines, good restaurants nearby, are just things that we have constructed for our particular way of living. But there are other equally satisfying ways of living that do not have these things. We are brainwashed by the culture that we live in to believe that so many things around us are essential. I haven't gotten rid of my car or my cell phone or my dishwasher, but my understanding of the world has increased. I've learned that much of what we have, our things as well as our institutions, are constructed by us and could be very different if we lived in a different place and a different culture. So, what is essential? What is real? What is it that we cannot do without? For me, it is my values and principles, the way that I treat other people and the way that I want to be treated, my desire to make a difference in the world, my obligation to find out what I do well and to nourish that gift. All of these things one might call my humanity. I am a single link in the long chain of human beings who have lived through the millennia. Even though individual lives come and go, there are atoms of oxygen and hydrogen and carbon recirculated in air and soil, the chain of humanity remains. Through the things that I do, I affect other people who live beyond me, and they in turn affect others who live beyond them, and on, so that there is a small trace of my existence that continues. I am part of the great chain of existence, and that's my view of the world.
right, well, I will do my best to be on time. My debate teacher used to teach me that there were 8 rules to giving an excellent presentation, and the 8th one was to be brief. And I never got to learn the other 7 rules. Oh, come on, that was a much better joke. You guys need to give me more than that. You know, this is gonna be a really long night, because that's about the best I can do. Okay, so I'm here to tell you a bit about where I find meaning and purpose. And I think the where question is very important, because if I look in the right place for meaning, then my hope is that it will make me a better person, that I'll feel more secure, I'll be more joyful, I'll appreciate beauty more, I'll be more at peace. And if I look in the wrong place for meaning or purpose, then ultimately, even if I reach the goal that I set out for myself, I'm going to be disappointed, because I won't find the peace or the security or the joy that I was looking for. And let me start off with an example of the wrong way to look for purpose. So, when I was in junior high and high school, I was a geek. Now, I know many of you are shocked at this. You're thinking, you know, you're a quantum chemistry professor at MIT, and you were a geek in high school. Get out of town. But, you know, when I was in high school, I was too smart for my own good. I was pretty socially awkward. And to compound matters, I grew too quickly. So, you know, about 6 months out of the year, you can count on all my clothes being too small for me. And the unfortunate reality is that chicks don't dig guys who are awkward and too smart and don't have clothes that fit them. So, you know, at my high school, there were the popular kids, and then there were kids like me. And I was one of those unpopular kids who wanted desperately to be cool. I wanted desperately to be part of the in crowd. I thought if maybe I could get to be really accepted, then I'd be content. And it didn't really make me a very nice person, because one of the ways to, you know, move up in the social ranks is to shun everybody you think who's lower on the ladder than you are. You know, so to say, okay, well, you know, take all the people and say, oh, well, you don't wear the right clothes or have the right friends, or ironically say, well, you're all the other people on the chemistry Olympiad team, and I am far cooler than you are. And you know, I sacrificed all of this. And in the end, I was disappointed, because even when I attained, you know, some sense of acceptance or some small amount of feeling cool, it didn't bring me peace. Because even when I felt cooler, I still wanted to be more popular. That was all I wanted, was more popular, more people to like me. And I worried what would happen if my newfound sense of coolness was taken away, which always inevitably it was when people found out I was on the chemistry Olympiad team. But the point is that because I had the wrong aim in mind, the wrong purpose, I never got peace. I never got to be where I wanted to be. And, you know, we're all, well, probably almost everybody in the audience is out of high school, but you've probably recognized that life outside of high school isn't really all that different than high school. You know, we just take popularity and we substitute something else, something that sounds more grown up in its place. You know, we say things like, okay, well, I want to get good grades and graduate from a good school, or I want to be successful in my work, or I want to be wealthy or famous. And, you know, the result is exactly the same. If you define success by getting ahead, you're going to be disappointed. And you won't find the peace or the joy that you seek. You know, the thing that I like is from the movie Fight Club. It says, you know, the things you own will end up owning you. You know, okay, maybe some of you in the audience are more mature and realistic and say, okay, look, I read Us Weekly. I've read about Jen and Brad and Angelina, and I know that fame and wealth won't make me happy. So, you know, okay, I'm going to choose something that's, you know, more mature. I'm going to say, all right, well, I'll choose science, or I'll choose to invest in my family and friends, or I'll seek to get justice for the oppressed. I'll set this up as the ultimate aim of my life. You know, and I think all of those things are pretty risky too. And my reason is that, okay, look, those are all good things, but investing them with ultimate value is dangerous, because that's not what they're intended for. You know, they're intended to be partial values. So I'll give you an example. As Roz mentioned, in my research group, we work on solar energy. One of our goals is to try to create a form of solar energy that's cheap enough that it can be used across the world to provide energy for everyone without producing greenhouse gases. So I think most people would agree that that's a good goal to work on. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think there would be something wrong if I said, that's the aim of my life, to bring solar energy to the masses, to make the world, you know, a solar energy world. And the reason for that is because it might not pan out. It might be that, you know, I work on this for 40 years, and after 40 years, we still can't do it. Or it might be that I work on this for 20 years and we get really, really close, and then some other technology comes along and does it better and faster and cheaper than we can. Cold fusion comes along. And if that happens, and my life purpose was to provide solar energy for the world, I'm going to be disappointed. Because let's be honest, if I set my purpose as some career goal or some family goal or some specific goal like that, my ultimate purpose isn't just to see that thing happen, but to be the one who makes it happen. And so if that opportunity is taken from me, I'm going to be bitter. I'm going to be like, well, my life was wasted. And so where do I find meaning and purpose? Well, I believe, just to have a statement of my belief for meaning and purpose, I believe that our deepest needs, things like our thirst for justice, our hunger for security, our search for answers, and our desperate need for hope, all of these things, for me, are met in the person of Jesus Christ. And fundamentally what I believe in is Jesus' power to change me, to change who I am, to make me different, and to make my life different. Because ultimately, the line between justice and injustice, the line between evil and good, the line between popular and being an outcast, isn't a line between me and some phantom group of other people. It's a line that goes right through myself. Because, I already bemoaned to you. I said, I was such a loser in high school. None of the cool kids liked me. But at the same time, I contributed to the social structure by saying, okay, everybody else who I think is a bigger loser than me, I'm going to make sure that you know that I think that. I contributed to the injustice. It's not that I thought that was the right thing to do. I thought, at the time I was like, this is probably not a very nice thing to do, and yet I did it anyway. And I can come up with 1,000 other examples about myself that are the same way, and I'm sure you can come up with the same things about yourselves, that, we all think it's not okay to lie. And yet we get in a bind, things are going tough, and we say, all right, well, I'll just tell a little bit of a lie to protect myself, because, I'm not really that bad of a person. Or we know it's not good to work so hard that we lose touch with our family and friends, and yet there's so many P-sets due this week, I've really just got to bear down. The thing is, that we want to do what's right, but we can't find the strength to do it. And I think that's strange. It seems like what we need is someone who is stronger than us, who can change the way we are. And I believe that person is Jesus. And the story of my life is the story of me being made bit by bit more like Jesus. And I think that it's the same as, we are supposed to talk about the universe. It's a microcosm for me of the universe, because the story of the universe is the story of God bit by bit changing the universe into his just kingdom. Okay, so what does this mean in practice in the last 2 minutes and 7 seconds I have here? Okay, well, first, I've found meaning in embracing downward mobility as opposed to upward mobility. It's something like what Professor Lightman was sharing. So in Jewish society, it was every bit as stratified as my high school. There was the in crowd, there were the Pharisees and Sadducees, and then there were varying degrees of rejects. And Jesus spent most of his time hanging out with the rejects. And I find a great deal of meaning in doing the same. I've spent time with poor kids in Honduras, homeless adults here in Boston, and I'm just amazed at how much trust they place in God in their situation. And here at MIT, I feel more at peace counseling a student who's in trouble than I do, being at some faculty meeting. And for those of you, I know there's a lot of students out there, you know how tough it is to be a student here at MIT. I mean, after all, the underground motto of MIT is IHTFP, which is I hate this. Okay, I'm not going to say the last 2 words because we're posting this video on YouTube and I don't want it to get flagged for objectionable content. So if you don't know what the last 2 words in the slogan are, just turn to the person next to you. They'll fill you in. And I know that the slogan is tongue-in-cheek, but I think it reflects the fact that there are very, very many people here at MIT who feel like they are rejects, like they came here expecting one thing and got stuck with something else. And for me, I look at this as a great opportunity because if I can reach out to those folks, maybe I can make up for being such a jerk in high school. And the other thing I find is that because my work is not the center of my universe, I can accept failure a little bit better. And maybe I should say not accept, but I can deal with failure without crying extensively in public. Because, my work is very important to me. But when things don't work out, I feel that if work is not the center of my universe, I can deal with it a little better. So I could give you an example of that, but I'm out of time, so if you want to know about how work sometimes doesn't work out for me, you can ask me. Okay, thanks.
Thanks very much for coming. One of the many great things about MIT is that there are events like this. Well, I'm afraid that I'm not perhaps the ideal speaker for this event. I don't have a worldview, not at any rate if that suggests a grand synoptic vision of the furniture of the universe and how it all fits together. The world's a bit too big for me to get a clear view of it. It would be some sort of compensation if I could instead recount a tortuous, ultimately uplifting spiritual journey, dispensing my accumulated wisdom to callow undergraduates. But I can't do that either. In fact, I never got on that bus. I don't think there's a God, but in a sense I'll try to explain. I don't regard the question of theism as particularly urgent or important. I was born in England and had the mildest of religious upbringings. My mother was a Christian who made little fuss about it. My father, on the other hand, had a deep interest in various Eastern spiritual traditions, and in particular in the teachings of an Armenian mystic called George Gurdjieff. Our family sometimes visited a country house called Coombe Springs, which was the center for followers of Gurdjieff in England. Those occasions, my mother and father would participate in Sufi dancing and other spiritual exercises while I roamed about the grounds. As a small boy, I never knew exactly what was going on or what the point was, and I still remain baffled. At high school, there was the typical compulsory Christian assembly to start the day, a few hymns and a prayer. I don't remember actually praying. The main lasting effect of this was a sentimental attachment to William Blake's poem, and did those feet in ancient time, particularly the last part about England's green and pleasant land. The doctrines of Christianity or any other religion never attracted me. I wish I could say that this was due to a stubborn streak of intellectual independence on my part, but the main reason is that the prevailing culture was not exactly steeped in religious certainty. In the early 80s, the then Bishop of Durham in England, Dr. David Jenkins, notoriously compared the resurrection to a conjuring trick with bones. That prompted the Lord Chancellor, Lord Hailsham, who's a member of Margaret Thatcher's cabinet, to reply, "I much prefer the word of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, because they were there, and David Jenkins wasn't." Well, never mind that none of the four gospel writers actually were there. Around that time, the Anglican priest Don Cupid's book, Taking Leave of God, and a related documentary presented on the BBC, also made a few ripples in the baptismal font. "I continue to speak of God and to pray to God," Cupid writes at the end of Taking Leave of God. "God," he goes on, "is the religious demand and ideal, the pearl of great price and the enshriner of values. He is needed, but as a myth." Cupid weathered the ensuing storm in part because of support from the highest of authorities, the Archbishop of Canterbury himself. The Church of England is indeed a broad church. To borrow a quip the philosopher A.N. Whitehead made about Unitarians, we Anglicans believe in at most one God. Really, my first encounter with serious religious belief was as a student at university studying mathematics. I saw many of my friends convert to evangelical Christianity, often in the most spectacular fashion. The religious services featured speaking in tongues, laying on of hands, even the occasional miraculous healing. I had a strong pragmatic reason for joining in the fun, since a girl I was rather keen on had accepted Jesus as her savior. I still have a Bible she gave me. Despite this considerable incentive, believe me, at the time it was considerable, I was completely unmoved. At university, I read the philosopher Bertrand Russell's essay, Why I'm Not a Christian, which was written in 1927. Russell tried to show that the traditional arguments for the existence of God fail, and that religious institutions, and even the figure of Christ himself, were not above criticism, while graciously conceding that Christ's teaching contained some excellent maxims. Russell concluded that, quoting, "I cannot myself feel that either in the matter of wisdom or in the matter of virtue, Christ stands quite as high as some other people known to history, I think I should put Buddha and Socrates above him in that respect. Russell's view struck me as perfectly sensible. His essay illustrates, by the way, that the so-called new atheism of Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and others is quite old hat. Anyway, let me now try and explain briefly the sense in which I think the issue of theism is unimportant. It has to do with a point that Plato made more than 2 millennia ago, and that philosophers have repeated ad nauseam ever since, including Russell, for example. It deserves repeating again only because it seems so hard for people to accept. Imagine a mother commanding a boy to stop hitting his brother. The mother is issuing the command because she recognizes a certain moral fact, that the boy should not hit his brother. It would be a confusion to think that this moral fact depends on the mother's command. A gratuitous sibling hitting is wrong, whether mothers are around to tell us not to do it. If she had said, hit your brother even harder, that would not change the moral fact, although it would make us think less well of her. Now imagine a father, in fact, a father better than all other fathers, a father who is supremely good. Unlike fathers and mothers here on earth, this other worldly father's commands track the moral facts precisely. If he says, don't do it, then his command is always appropriate. We shouldn't do it. Plato's point is that what goes for ordinary mothers and fathers goes for the father with a capital F equally well. The father no more makes it true that the boy ought not to hit his brother than his mother makes it true. It is true anyway, and that's why we're paying the capital F father a genuine compliment when we say he is extremely good. So the upshot is that the moral facts, and facts about value in general, need no theistic foundation and can be left to look after themselves. The things that are of deepest value, a selfless act of kindness, a mother's love for her child, the pursuit of knowledge, the iPhone, and so on, shine just as brightly in a world without an omnibenevolent architect. That is the sense in which God leaves everything that really matters as it is. Finally, all this would hardly be worth saying, it would be extremely boring, if religion were like homeopathy or astrology, something easily rejected with the benefit of education and intelligence. But of course, religion is not like that. As Exhibit A, I give you 2 of my fellow panel members. No doubt many audience members can comprise Exhibit B. But to me, the appeal of religion to people I admire and respect is one of the greatest mysteries of all. Thank you.
So I didn't realize anybody actually read the blog. I'll have to be a little more careful what I put in it now. So for those of you not from MIT, when Professor von Voorhis refers to IHTFP, it stands for I have truly found paradise. Thank you all for inviting me to speak here. The talks have been very eloquent and thoughtful. Since I was given this set of questions ahead of time, I just addressed them in a straightforward kind of way. You know, being a kind of a space engineer of some kind, that's what we actually tend to do. So the first thing I want to do is just talk about my worldview, and then actually talk a bit about what that has actually meant in practice here at MIT. I've actually been at MIT now for 25 years, so I literally just got a chair. You get a chair at 25 years to sit on. I'm not kidding. You do get a chair if you're here for that long. So my worldview. I start by saying there is a God who created the universe, and he's not an impersonal God. He has declared himself as a loving God who seeks a relationship with us and also gives us free will to choose him or not. And our purpose then is found in being in relationship with him. He calls us to love him with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And he calls on us to love our neighbors as ourselves. Now, you'll recognize that as explicitly what Jesus summarized the law in the Old Testament when asked to do that. And I would say he came to earth in the presence of Jesus Christ to show us the way to him. So what that means to me is that we can actually find God here through both his word and also through reason applied to his creation. So if I were to describe myself, I would say I would describe myself as a reasoning Christian person. And what that means to me is that the world and its associated events, even with immense suffering caused by natural events, must be ultimately explicable. And the reason I say that is because that is the piece that gives me the most doubt, how to explain suffering caused by natural events as opposed to suffering caused by evil. Now, what has that actually meant for me here? This faith that I've just talked about has driven me to the idea that I want in what I do to do some good in this world through what I do, and in a sense through what I'm actually good at. And it turned out, because of the way I was brought up in England as well, that I ended up being good at science and mathematics, and so it seemed like a natural path to go down. It does mean this. It means that I do feel, however, since it's important for me to interact with people in what I do, that I feel called to the vocation of being a professor. There's many ways you can do science and engineering, and I know lots of people who do it out, in the big world. But the vocation of being a professor, which allows me both to explore science and engineering and also to interact with people, especially young people, in a meaningful way, is to me a meaningful thing to actually do, and it's something that I feel is a calling. Now, in terms of how that worldview has actually driven me over the years, when I finished here at MIT, I actually I ended up doing a PhD in plasma physics, as it turns out, and there were many things I could have gone and done at that point. And I had friends who actually did do this. One of the particular choices that was very clear to me was a choice to go into working on offensive weapons, particularly nuclear weapons. So, for those of you who, this is ancient history now, when I graduated in 1980, there was a Cold War, and this was a very real decision. I had friends who went to work at Lawrence Livermore National Lab and worked on designing nuclear weapons, and I decided as a moral statement that I could never do that. Now, whatever choice I made, it would always be to stay away from that particular class of offensive weapons. Secondly, I would say in mentoring of students and junior faculty, I have, in my 25 years here, repeatedly run into students and junior faculty who find their identity in being at MIT. And I'm sure it's not true of anybody here, but believe me, I've met a lot of students and faculty like that, right? And in doing well at MIT. Now, the reality is this is a hard place to be, and there's so many first-rate people here that some failure is inevitable. And when that happens, then a person's sense of value has to be found in something other than them being here. It has to be found in something other than getting all A's, or getting tenure at MIT, or passing the qualifying exam, in the PhD sequence. All situations that I've faced. I believe very strongly that a person's sense of value is found in their intrinsic value before God. And this is, of course, is the concept of being made in the image of God. But even if I didn't believe that, their value is not found in being at MIT. And so what I have had to quite a few times do is help individuals see that their value lies somewhere else than, in their particular situation at MIT. It also meant that when I started here at MIT as a faculty member, I agreed that I would maintain for myself the sense of perspective and values, both before God and with my wife. and not devote all my time to being here. So, we agreed with my family that weekends and evenings, were off limits. And, whatever happens would happen. It turns out later on, I found out that the probability of survival, since I'm also a minority faculty member, my probability of survival when I started was only 25%, and that data is actually in the race report that Paula Hammond released last year. So, with 75% probability, I would end up being somewhere else, but that's just how it was, Last two things, this search for meaning and purpose through, I would say, Christian faith has actually motivated my intellectual areas of interest. I started out doing this theoretical plans for physics, and then after a while, I decided I wanted to see something where there was much more connection to, again, people. So actually, that's why I moved in the direction of policy work and the interaction between technology and policy, because policy is how society builds in the values that it cares about. And that ultimately led me to the directorship of the MIT Technology and Policy program, which was a very interesting time as we wrestled with the students about how values were implicit in the choices that they actually made. Finally, I would say this sense of calling here in this university environment has actually motivated me, to stay, because I've been asked repeatedly to take other jobs in industry and in the government, and it's the ability to work with students, my own students, my advisees, and to work more generally with the student body, which actually motivates me to stay and, to try, in that sense, to do some good with the people that I actually run into here. So thank you very much for, hearing me out. I'm very impressed with the eloquence of all those who went before me, and I'm looking forward to the questions.
Starting with Alan, you commented we are nothing but material stuff. Science cannot prove that, so why do you hold that belief?
I hold that belief because all of our experience with animals, with living creatures, shows that they're made out of atoms. We haven't found anything other than material stuff, even though we don't understand fully workings of certain parts of the body. All the evidence is that it obeys the laws of physics and chemistry and biology. So that's why I believe that we're made out of material stuff.
I'd like to ask if others would like to comment on that. Troy, do you hold the same belief?
No, I guess I would say that it's kind of the question kind of points out the fact that, you ask, well, I agree that, everything science finds says, okay, well, all we find is atoms and molecules and stuff, but you have to ask, well, what else would it find if there is something that is immaterial that we are made of? Would it necessarily be something that science wouldn't be able to find? And you could obviously argue that, well, that's the nature of something that's immaterial, is it's the thing that science can't find. But, yeah.
Well, there's a lively debate in the philosophy of mind on exactly this issue. I guess the majority view, and my own view, is that we are entirely material things, but a significant number of contemporary philosophers hold a dualistic view and think, in particular, that conscious experience can't be given a purely physical or material explanation. But I don't think this issue is particularly relevant to religious questions or questions about the ultimate significance or purpose of it all, in fact.
So I guess I would look at the question this way. It's manifestly obvious that we are material things, right? Because you could take a human body and decompose it down to its elements, and there it is, right? So the question is more around, it seems to me, with the issue of what happens in our brains and with, I suppose, what we would call consciousness. So one of the things in my own work that I have looked at in not human beings, admittedly, but in complex systems, is we've looked at lots of systems whose properties are actually emergent. That is, from the individual pieces, I could not tell you all the things that this system is actually going to do. There was actually a talk here by Bill Wolfe about 2 years ago, who's a first-rate computer scientist who argued that you couldn't even tell what your laptop was going to do because the number of possible states it could get into, was so large. First of all, he argued it was either very difficult to compute or not computable. But even there might be emergent properties. So I guess I would ask the question, and maybe this is where the dualistic philosophers come from. Even with this, just describing us all as, atoms of carbon and oxygen and so on. I mean, once you put all that together with this idea of consciousness, I mean, are there emergent states that we have which are actually not predictable just from summing up all of those things? Right?
Okay. Another comment one of you made, Dan, you said that you get your sense of value in the person of Jesus Christ. I'm curious where the rest of you get your ultimate sense of value. Alex, would you like to start?
Okay.
Easy questions, right?
Well, I'd like to know what Dan meant by that. Of course, you might mean that you come to, or an important way of coming to know about what's right and wrong or what you ought to do is through the teachings of Jesus. That might be what he meant. Alternatively, he might have meant that, there would be no right or wrong, there would be no value or disvalue if there weren't some supernatural entity. I certainly don't think the second thing, although of course I'm quite happy to grant that by reading the Gospels you could come to learn something of importance about morality and value. But I have a feeling, I'm not quite sure that I've directly answered.
It's not answering where you're getting your value from.
Well, but I think, I mean, if the question is, how do I know what's right or wrong? And of course, I'm completely fallible on this question, just like everyone else. And I think the answer to that question in my own case is that basically the very same answer in Dan's case and the very same answer in Troy's case. It's not as if one approaches, let's say, the Bible with a sort of completely moral blank slate. Well, I have absolutely no idea what is right or wrong. Let's see what I ought to do. Because, of course, I mean, the proof of that is that as soon as you come across something that's a little iffy in the Bible, I mean, whatever in Deuteronomy it says that if you have some drunken son, he should be stoned to death. You don't think, well, that's an interesting discovery. You bear your own, you bring your own antecedent moral sensibility to the text.
Value?
Am I next?
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
okay.
we'll go.
So, I mean, I guess, I think what Alex raised about, I would say that, Dan and I probably find our value and meaning and purpose in similar places. And maybe to answer what Alex is bringing up about, what does that mean when I say I found value or meaning in Jesus? It's not that I feel like Jesus teaches me what's right and wrong, or solely that. I would say that my use of the word value is more similar to saying I find great meaning in being a father. There's just an inherent meaning in my role as being a father because of my relationship with my kids. And I would say I find a similar meaning in my relationship with Jesus Christ as a person. He's not just, it's not just a book that's a set of things, but he's a person. And I find similar meaning in my relationship with him. So it's not just, it's not just that he teaches me what's right and wrong, but that I feel like in knowing Jesus and in learning about him that I feel more capable of doing what is right, or a better insight into why what is right, or what the ultimate aim of that is.
So in the relationship. Yeah. Alan?
Well, first of all, I don't think that it's necessary to have a belief in God or have the existence of God in order to have a moral structure. I think that the human beings are capable of devising moral structures on their own. My moral structures have come by trial and error, living in the world, having different relationships with people. But I also want to point out that right or wrong is often situational and culturally dependent. For example, many people would say that it's right to kill someone who's to defend your family, or to kill an enemy in warfare to defend your country, whereas if you go out on the street and you just shoot someone, that's considered wrong. So that's an extreme example, but it demonstrates that the context is important, and different cultures also have different values. So it's really a somewhat complicated question. As I said in my talk, for me, the golden rule transcends all contexts and cultures. It's the one principle that I've found that seems to hold for all situations.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's a question for everyone, and maybe we'll start over here again. If you are wrong about your worldview, how significantly would this impact your life? And an add-on to that is, what if you'd grown up in a different context, right, which could have affected your worldview? And they added on Professor Hastings and Van Voorhis. Did you grow up as Christians? So I don't know who would like to start. Eager hands raised here.
Of course, it crucially depends on who's right. I mean, I mean, there might be a God who reserves a special place for atheistic philosophers. This is really what makes this so serious in a way. If Dan and Troy are right, then I'm screwed, basically. You laugh, but at least on the orthodox interpretation of the fate meeting the non-believer, which involves much wailing and gnashing of teeth, I don't look forward to my prospects on the assumption that I'm wrong and that some orthodox version of Christianity is right.
Okay.
You want me to answer that?
Yeah.
So I guess the first thing I would ask is, how would I know that I was wrong, right? I mean, at least somebody would have to prove to me that God did not exist. I'm not sure that's a provable statement.
But just suppose you are wrong. In fact, suppose you're wrong, but you don't know that you're wrong.
How would that impact your life?
Suppose, in fact, that you're wrong.
Yeah. Suppose your worldview was wrong. How would this impact your life? And also, they want to know if you grew up as Christian.
Well, I'm not sure. Frankly, if I was wrong but didn't know I was wrong, I'm not sure I'd do anything any differently, right? Right? Because frankly, I'm doing things that I enjoy, and why would I do something that's any different than that, right? And so the answer to the question, did I grow up as a Christian? Yeah, I grew up in a Christian home, but what is certainly the case is, towards the end of my, what in this context you call high school and then early college, I explored a number of philosophical alternatives. So it's not as if I went straight from growing up in a Christian home to saying, yes, I'm a Christian, right? It was not a linear path in any sense.
Okay.
I can go next. So I'll answer the question of, how would it be different if I was wrong? And let's just suppose I also knew that I was wrong. So, somehow I knew that I was wrong. And I'll have to confess that, and I can say how that would affect my life because, as much as I say, this is what I believe and this is my worldview, it's not as if, I'm an anxious and neurotic person by nature. And so even though I have faith in something I doubt, I say, well, what if God really, what if Jesus really didn't do this or that or the other thing? And so I can say how that makes me feel. I have a paralyzing fear of dying. I would say my alternative worldview is very similar. Well, not that Alan has a paralyzing fear of dying, but that the idea that, the alternative for me is that we are just molecules, and then we are dust, and to dust we return, and after I die, there's nothing. And that's a paralyzing fear for me. And when I have doubts, that's where it goes for me. And the question, the question of whether I was raised as a Christian, it's a similar answer to Dan. I grew up as a Christian. When I was in college, I don't know that I would say I explored other philosophical, unless not really thinking about it anymore and deciding that I just wanted to go party was, a good philosophical plan. So during college, I had a different worldview. And I have since come back to a more Christian worldview now. So.
Well, I think there are many elements to a worldview. And in terms of the ones that I talked about, the only one element that is of a binary nature that could be, yes, you're right or you're wrong, is I said that I was an atheist. And if I discovered that God exists, and by God, I'm assuming that we sort of generally mean some being with infinite powers and so on. It wouldn't change my life at all, because my morals and my values and my principles for living are based upon my experience with the world, my own experience, and whether or not there was a supreme being, whether or not there was an afterlife, wouldn't affect the way that I feel that I should live in the world.
Okay, here's another one from a questioner who says they were a militant atheist before becoming a Christian, and is curious, what personal experience would it take to change your religious beliefs? So why don't we start, somebody eager to start.
Well, I can start. I intimated in my, comments, there are times when I have doubts, and the thing, frankly, that gives me the greatest doubt is the nature of suffering, but not suffering caused by man's inhumanity to man, because that is actually explicable on the basis of a concept of evil. It's suffering caused by natural events, right? It's when a tsunami kills, as the one off Indonesia did, 200,000 people, far from the event, who on the face of it had just going about their lives, they weren't doing bad things, right? And suddenly they were gone, and that causes me doubt.
That's a very good question. Obviously something happened to Troy and Dan to make them have the beliefs that they do, and presumably if that, whatever it was, happened to me, I changed my mind. Of course, you can certainly imagine all sorts of evidence that the universe, or certainly our particular corner of it, was created and sustained by some intelligent entity. Imagine if the stars suddenly rearranged themselves one day into some message. All sorts of things like that. Whether I guess I don't. And that might make me very worried, because I wouldn't know what the intentions of such a being were. But yeah, just to go back, just to really echo something that Alan said, I think if I did change my mind along those lines, it really, in a way, it really wouldn't make any difference. The things that I value would remain just as value, and the numerous hideous evils in the world that Dan was alluding to would remain just as hideous.
So it's difficult for me to say what would change my faith in the sort of, make me lose my faith or change my belief from what it is now, because sort of just difficult. I don't know. So maybe I will share the inverse question of what did change my faith, and I'll try to be brief about it. But and this also may cause me to lose some credibility with the audience, but when I was in graduate school, I feel like God spoke to me. That was the experience for me that changed my belief system. Because, I mean, as I said, I was sort of just off doing my own thing. And, I suppose I believed that God existed, but I thought he was kind of a watchmaker. He didn't really care very much what was going on. And so the fact that he spoke to me made me quite realize, okay, well, maybe God's actively involved in this universe. And if so, he might not be that happy with the way that I'm behaving right now. And it sort of struck me, okay, well, I have on the one hand this paralyzing fear of death, but there's also this paralyzing fear that, well, maybe God does exist. And, as Alan said, if he does, or Alex said, if he does, I'm screwed. And that sort of realization gave, for me, a great deal more urgency to the faith that I thought I had espoused earlier in life. So.
Well, it's a great question, what it would take to make a person change their belief, either in God or not in God. I mean, the history of science and technology have shown that many things that we thought were unexplainable later became explained by science. This disintegration of the neutron before the neutrino was discovered looked like there was a violation of the conservation of energy. If you took our cell phones now and took them back 200 years, it would look like an object made by God. I mean, it would be so unexplainable by the technology of that time. So I probably, if I saw something that appeared to be a miracle, I would think that at some future time there would be a scientific explanation of that thing. So it would be very hard to make me change my belief.
So it sounds like you can't articulate a thing that would make...
I can't articulate a thing because I know from the history of science and technology that many phenomena have appeared to be otherworldly at their time and then later found an explanation. And so I would probably have the same reaction. If this table suddenly levitated, I would probably think that there were magnets under it or something like that, or some force that we would later discover scientifically.
Okay, so I'm going to give you all a break and ask you an easy binary question. Yes, no. If there was something compelling enough to make you change your belief, would you be willing to change your belief? You can start down there, right?
Well, in principle, yes, but I don't know what that compelling thing could be.
I would say, absolutely, yes.
Well, I would hope so. I mean, one always hopes that if one has compelling evidence for some hypothesis, then one believes the hypothesis. But of course, sometimes it happens that one is presented with compelling evidence for a hypothesis, but for various psychological reasons, one doesn't believe the hypothesis. So, I would hope so. That's my answer. So it's not a binary question after all.
Yeah, and I agree with Alec. I would hope so too.
Okay, that was a nice little commercial break. Here's a question about your responsibility. As influential scientists, what responsibility do you feel in influencing the students you work with? Start. Actually, you guys have those who have a science background but aren't actually, who are like in humanities and all now, you can tweak this a little bit, but certainly. Mm-hmm.
Sure. I mean, I think that, my view of the response, it is true that, not only the people up here on stage, but the people in the audience, we have, from the positions that we are in, a great deal of power, even though sometimes it feels like we may not have so much power, that things sort of go along without us and we have no control. The positions we are in, we do have a significant amount of power, and I feel like the responsible exercise of power often in the world, the exercise of power is just used to, collect more power. It's kind of what it does. But I feel like the responsible exercise of power is actually to care for the powerless. So to take care of folks who don't have a voice or don't have the ability to do whatever it is that you can do. And so, so here at MIT, that's, saying, okay, look, you look out for the students who are, maybe a little bit lost, a little bit aimless. You look out for the faculty who are, further down the food chain than you are. As you mentioned, I'm one of the youngest members of the department, so there aren't many further down the food chain than me. But, when some eventually come along, I'll try to look out for them. So.
Mentor.
What was the question again?
So, as influential professors, what responsibility, they changed the word from scientists to professors. Nice, this instant update here. What responsibility do you feel in influencing the students you work with?
Well, I like courses or classes that are interdisciplinary, where you're not just teaching the student one subject, but you're putting it in a broad context. So to that extent, I think that all teachers have a responsibility to students to convey their understanding of the world, but they also have a responsibility to listen to what the students have to say. Responsibility works in both directions.
Well, we have a thriving philosophy graduate program here at MIT, which might come as some surprise to you. Sometimes I think the direction of influence is more from the more from the graduate students to the faculty than the other way around. But as far as responsibility to the students go, I think probably the faculty as a whole would agree that it's mainly to allow the students to be as good philosophers as they can be, and many of them turn out to be excellent philosophers.
So here's what I think. I think we need to ask our students to be reflective. So, just give you an example. Whenever I have an advisee who gets a poor grade, I spend some time with them, ask them to reflect upon why that is. And it's the answer almost with 100% certainty is not lack of intellectual ability. It's usually something else, right? So first of all, be reflective and reflect upon what's happening in their lives. Secondly, I think we should help our students articulate their values. So, I have a certain set of values, which I elucidated, but, I never start when talking to a student by saying, here are my values. I say, what are your values? And, if they can't articulate their values, then I push them to actually do that, And then thirdly, I think we have a responsibility to help them think critically. So, I spend a lot of time with my PhD students helping them to think critically, and deeply is, what we actually have to do. Along the context that they themselves define, but that's what I do.
Okay. All right, getting a lot of good ones here. So let's see. I have a question for the Christians. Why Christianity? What makes Christianity more important or believable than Greek mythology or any other religion?
Dan?
What makes it more important or believable than Greek mythology? Well, I would say Greek mythology is just that. It's complete mythology, right? There's no evidence that supports any of that stuff. Gods like Zeus and, Apollo and all that kind of stuff. So, whereas I would say that there is ample historical evidence for certainly the development of something called the Christian faith, and also, of course, for the person of Jesus Christ as a historical individual, right? So, in that sense, it's much more believable to me than that other kind of stuff, which really is not believable at all. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think, the question of why is Christianity more believable than Hinduism or Islam or Judaism? I don't. There's a famous statement that says the credibility of something has nothing to do with its truth, and vice versa. The truth of something has nothing to do with its credibility. So I don't choose Christianity because it's more credible than Islam or Hinduism or any other religion. I choose Christianity because I believe that it is right. And it's not that I can, point out reasons X, Y, and Z. Well, here are the reasons that Christianity is so much more reasonable. I mean, I can come up with some, but ultimately those aren't the foundation of why I think 99% of other Christians would choose Christianity over another. It's something that springs out of faith, which by its nature, is not something that's provable.
Do either of you want to comment on what they're saying? No? Or counter?
Well, no. I mean, the question is pointing out some phenomenon that I think should be perhaps worrying to Dan and Troy, or maybe also in a way worrying to Alan and myself, and it's that there's sort of widespread disagreement. So even if one goes into these things with a religious cast of mind, who knows what faith you're going to end up with? Mm-hmm. So one might think, given that it's not as if believers in Islam or Judaism or whatnot are less well informed or not as smart as believers in Christianity, that there's some particular puzzle for Dan and Troy, namely, well, why is it that these people have ended up with these completely wrong-headed religious views when they had basically the same starting point as me? I mean, they had essentially the same evidence, and they're just as clever as me, and so on. So insofar as you don't have a good answer to that question, maybe that's a reason for thinking that, for doubting your own views.
Mm-hmm. Professor Lightman, do you have doubts of your atheist views?
Well, I believe in keeping an open mind. So I am constantly interested in seeing what the latest thinking is, not only in science, but in religion and philosophy. And so I would say I'm basically a skeptical person. And I view everything with a skeptical eye. And when new thinking, new evidence comes in, I try to look at it and analyze it and give my own critique of it and incorporate it into my worldview. So what I believe in is my best thinking at that moment in time.
Okay. And you, do you have any doubts of your atheism?
Well, it certainly is true that the presence of people like Troy and Dan do raise some doubts. I mean, insofar as I don't have some sort of satisfactory debunking explanation of why they believe what they do. Of course, various theories of the attractions of religious belief are more and more widely studied and elaborated these days, but I can't say that any one of them is particularly satisfactory. So,
Quick question for Troy. Do you have openings for undergraduate researchers this summer?
All right, one opening. So if you ask the question, you can come talk to me afterwards, and we'll see what we can work out.
Okay, back to the topic of morality, which several of you touched on before. This question says, if morality is separate from God's existence, so we'll start with Alan and Alex on this one. If morality is separate from God's existence, what do you base morality upon? And does this morality apply to everyone?
Oh, great question. Well, I think that I base my morality on living in the world, observing what I feel, and as I said before, I think that some aspects of morality are situational and contextual. But I base my morality on my own experience in the world and by reading and talking to other thinkers whom I respect.
Well, I think the question is getting at the issue of something like what grounds morality if there is no God? Or, is it really true that if God is dead, all is permitted, as Nietzsche was supposed to have said? And it is true that philosophers who think about these questions are often very puzzled by the apparent existence of moral demands in the world as revealed to us by science. Sometimes they sort of put the point by saying, well, so science shows us that this is the case, and that is the case, and the other thing is the case, but we don't seem to be able to get out of this what ought to be the case. Forget what is the case. How do you get from that to... That doesn't of itself amount to what ought to be the case, what ought we to do. And that's a very complicated question, and I'm not really sure what I think about that. I have some inclination to think that the whole problem is misconceived, and really there was never any problem of this sort to begin with. But it's worth noting that all the serious attempts to answer this question, at any rate by philosophers who devote their professional lives to thinking about this issue, don't involve any supernatural entity or God, just because I think people who think about these issues a lot find it very hard to understand how that could possibly help.
As a professor, I always tell my students to make sure you read the question carefully and answer all parts of it. So I'm going to go back to the other part. Not just what do you base morality upon, but does this morality that you arrive at apply to everyone? And we'll come back to you on that too. You can start.
Yes. I mean, that is the answer. Yeah, the answer is yes. Yeah.
So it's a universal morality.
That's right. Yes. So I'm not myself a moral relativist. I don't think that moral truths are somehow relative to moral frameworks or relative to moral stances or something like that. So in that sense, I think they apply to everyone.
Thank you. And your moral truth based on your experience, is that also universally applicable?
Well, that's a great question. I don't know whether one can make a monolith out of morality and say that all aspects of morality are the same. So I would say that some aspects of morality are universal. And as I've repeated too many times already, I think the golden rule is universal and applies to everyone in every situation. But I think that there are other elements of morality, such as when is it permissible to take another life, or situational and might depend upon different people in different situations. So I can't lump all of those things together and say they're universal or not, they're not universal. To me, it's a very complicated structure, a person's moral beliefs.
Troy and Dan, do you want to comment on your morality derived from Christianity and its applicability beyond your lives?
Well, let me just comment that, even in the Christian faith, I mean, this very question, when is it right to take another life? There's a spectrum of belief, even within the Christian faith. I mean, there are people who are, on the basis of their faith, would argue for complete pacifism. You can never, ever take another life, right? And on the other hand, since I've had a long association with the U.S. military, I can tell you there are lots of people of Christian faith in the military who believe, under legal authority, that it's appropriate to actually do that. So it's not as if even in the Christian faith it gives you a clear answer to that is, always uniform. I think it does say you shall not murder, right? So, the cases where it's actually allowed, as I said, is under an appropriate legal authority, right? So it's not arbitrary and random, right?
I mean, I would say similar to Dan, I think that the Christian moral code does have universal authority, but that doesn't mean my particular version has universal authority, that I get to decide, this is exactly the way everything should be. And I would just like to affirm on the first part of the question, about if, whether moral authority need derive from God or not. I mean, I think we have two examples here on the stage of people who have, very well-defined high moral standards that are not derived from God. So I think that any argument that says, all people who don't believe in God, they're all these immoral people doing these bad things, that's, I think, poppycock. So.
Although I'm hearing some of the attributions are to things like the Golden Rule, which at least goes back to the Hebrew Scriptures and so forth. So I think the influence is kind of hard to tease apart. Here's a question for all of you. How far do you think scientific evidence can get us in providing a worldview? And do we have to have faith at some level? And how do you reconcile that with your science?
These questions are getting more and more difficult.
I'm saving the hardest for last. Yeah,
oh,
okay.
Good, I got something to look forward to. So how far can science advance our worldview? Do you have to have faith at some level, was the question, right? So I think one thing to understand in terms of my picture of the scientific method, is there are certain assumptions that go into the scientific method. The biggest assumption is that things are reproducible. If I do X one time and then I do it again, it will happen again. And that's an assumption built into the scientific method. You can't really use science to study things that are not reproducible. So that's an example of you take the scientific method. A lot of times when I do scientific experiments, I am taking the scientific method on faith. I'm taking it on faith that whatever I'm studying is going to turn out to be reproducible. That if I continue to apply my hypothesis testing conclusion, I will come to a conclusion that is transferable to other situations. So I think that, yes, science by itself doesn't get you all the way there. It's just a question of where do you place your faith? Do you say, okay, look, I'm going to assume that everything is going to be reproducible? Do I assume some things are reproducible and some are not? I happen to be of the opinion that some things are reproducible and some are not. But you could also have faith that everything is reproducible, and if it's not reproducible, you made a mistake.
Well, if you understand science relatively narrowly in the sense of those subjects taught under that name at MIT, then obviously science is by no means the touchstone of everything that's real and can't provide you with a complete worldview. You're not going to learn in your physics or chemistry classes that you shouldn't boil someone alive just for the fun of it. So, and neither are you going to learn in. I'm sure Troy's classes are excellent, but presumably they don't have bits about the beauty of nature in them. Yeah. So there are all these truths that you won't learn from from science classes at any rate narrowly construed. So in that sense, science is not all you need in developing a worldview. Just why faith has to come in at this point, I really don't know. Actually, I'd love to hear Troy and Dan tell us what they think faith is. Because one crude way of glossing it is to say, well, it's belief in the absence of evidence. But offhand, that sounds like a very bad thing.
So, I must confess, wondered at times whether science, even broadly construed, could explain things like our concepts of beauty and why human beings find meaning in listening to music and art and things like that, right? Because obviously science can explain, the nucleus splitting up and so on. So it has occurred to me, is it the case that over time, as we understand the functioning of the human brain more, that those things will also, fall, right? But whenever that happens, I remember when I used to run the technology and policy program, the very first thing we did with the students, who are all scientists and engineers when they come in, is we gave them the kidney example to illustrate something to them. So the kidney example goes like this. You have 5 kidneys or something available to transplant, and you have 10 people to transplant it. So on what basis do you make a choice, right? And for the MIT students, the most common answer is random number generator. Randomly choose 5 out of 10, all right? Okay, that sounds good. And then I tell them, well, but wait a minute. One of those people you just chose is a pedophile. I say, oh, no, we can't have that person. And one of the people you did not choose, worked with Mother Teresa, and they say, really a good, very good person. Oh, we've got to choose that person. And very quickly, they begin to appreciate they have values that they're bringing to bear. They are bringing values to bear, right? And now so I guess I'm not convinced that those things are ever, in some sense, at least I don't know. I don't believe they're ever computable by science. They're brought some other way to the problem.
I agree with what Alex and Dan said, so I won't take up airtime.
Okay, here's a question. Is there scientific evidence that a God created the world? I think we should start with Dan and Troy on this one.
It's a scientific evidence, but remember the way Troy defined it, right? That you define the hypothesis and then it's repeatable. And so since we have no way to, from our position, see other universes, I don't know how you'd actually test the hypothesis, right? So in that sense, the answer is no.
Yeah, I guess I would say, I'm not a, cosmologist, so I don't know all of the nuances of these things. I would say that, all about a lot of the thought about, the origin of the universe, the origin of the world is interpretation on top of science. And I would say that there are definitely a number of cosmologists who believe that there was a God who created the universe. There are also a number of cosmologists who believe that there is not a God who created the universe. And I don't believe that they get into fights over this at conferences. I believe this is something that is added on top. I think it is potentially consistent and potentially inconsistent with it's not potentially, it's potentially consistent with scientific knowledge of how the universe was created.
Well, so obviously neither Troy nor Dan, the answer is no, but obviously neither Troy nor Dan have any sympathy with intelligent design or the argument from design as it's called, because so that argument is, well, there are certain features of the universe, maybe features of terrestrial biology, maybe certain features of cosmology on a grand scale, the best explanation for which is that there's some designer or creator. And that's a paradigm case of, if you think that is persuasive. It's a paradigm case of scientific evidence for the existence of some creator. So just a remark. I guess neither Dan nor Troy think there's anything to that.
I don't know what I would say. I don't think there's anything to any of those. I guess I would say that, there certainly is a sense, and for the scientists who are cosmologists and look at the origin of the universe and say, I see the hand of God on this, I think it is saying, look, there's this beauty, this order, this structure, the physical laws that for them point towards, it's an arrow towards God, the same way that I think you've mentioned people use morality as an arrow that, the existence of this sort of sense of morality as an arrow that points toward God. So I think you can see things that point toward God, but in the scientific sense, they're not irrefutable proof. It's not as if, because it looks to me like these things were designed by a benevolent God, therefore one exists.
I think had the question been evidence for such
what was the question?
Well, the original question was scientific evidence.
Okay.
I think had it just simply said evidence.
Yes. Evidence, yes. I would say yes.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
So then, I would say evidence that is not irrefutable in a scientific sense.
It's not irrefutable.
Does that make sense to you?
Sorry, what's the evidence? I thought Troy was just saying that he's...
I think that people are being very careful scientists and making a distinction between scientific evidence that meets these criteria of repeatability and so forth versus just evidence, like maybe in a court of law, where there's a preponderance of observations that are consistent with one possible inference or explanation as opposed to another.
Yeah, I don't myself think there's really any such distinction. There are numerous scientific theories which are accepted or which people think are quite likely or serious contenders to be the truth, for which the evidence is very sort of inconclusive and somewhat speculative, and certainly the evidence is not repeatable in any sense. Or just take, I don't know, the hypothesis that the dinosaurs were wiped out by a meteorite or something. That's certainly a serious contender for the right account of why the dinosaurs died out, and it's a serious scientific hypothesis, but it's not as if the evidence comes from a whole bunch of repeatable experiments or something like that.
Right. This is a problem with all historical explanations.
And some people would say it was due to volcanism that it happened, right? So,
but it's not as if this makes the question beyond the reach of scientific inquiry or something like that. So I guess I would resist this contrast between so-called scientific evidence and other kinds of evidence.
All right, you guys ready for the last two questions, one for each of you? All right, so the first one is, if you could summarize your answer to the question of life, the universe, and MIT in one sentence, what would it be?
42.
And I'm going to prohibit 42 from being the answer, although I miss Douglas Adams. He was great. He used to come around here. He spoke at some of our events. Highly recommend his books. But if you could summarize your answer to the question of life, the universe, and MIT in one sentence, what would it be?
I think all MIT undergraduates are aliens.
All right.
With enormous brains.
Alan thinks you're all aliens with enormous brains. Okay. All right, next.
Well, my answer is it's not really a question, so could it be phrased? Sorry to be so... I choose MIT over life and the universe.
Back to your comments about finding identity at MIT.
Yeah. So this is very hard to answer. I guess I would say MIT is a great place that allows a multiplicity of viewpoints to exist where we can all search for truth and meaning in, some science or engineering thing, and philosophy.
Whether you're an alien or not. Okay.
So I guess I would say that, to me, the fact that we even asked that question is kind of telling. The fact that I think we, the 700, 600 people or so in this auditorium, or even MIT, which is this small plot of land in Massachusetts, could have some universal significance, is either extremely arrogant or extremely telling about something that we all think about human existence. So,
Just arrogant.
Could just be arrogant.
Just arrogant. All right, and then this is the final question here for each of you. So we've got an eager and excited MIT crowd here tonight, and Veritas is about asking life's hardest questions. Here's the question for you. What is the most important question that you think every student at MIT has to answer before they graduate?
Oh, before they graduate.
That's interesting. They edit out the part about stating it in a complete and grammatically correct sentence. What is the most important question every student at MIT has to answer before they graduate?
Well, I guess I would say, how then should you live, and will you make any difference?
I mean, procedurally, it's where is the registrar's office, but...
As we know, that question is just beyond the reaches of human inquiry. So,
can we do an experiment to see as an
But I
alternative?
suppose if I was being more serious about it, I would, why am I here? What am I here for? Would be the question I would hope everyone would consider before they get out.
Well, I think the most important questions, which some of you guys have already asked, are questions that don't have answers, and certainly needn't have answers at the time that you're 22 years old. So I think asking yourself the question, what I want to do with my life, how can I make a difference in the world, those are questions that are important to ask, but not necessarily to have answers for at that moment.
I agree with Alan. I mean, the important thing is not so much to answer the question, how should I live my life, but at least to ask it.
Okay. All right. Well, please join me in giving a round of applause to these